How's it going, everyone? It is I, Anime Outlet, and this is part 5 of What If Deku had water breathing. And now, before we begin, I would just like to ask you all to please put your what if suggestions down in the comments section below. And now, let's begin. Gripping his blade, Izuku jumps into action, jumping back up, dealing through the pain, slashing right down onto the Nomu's neck, knowing that everything he had to go into this slash, because if he didn't, then he was going to die. As Izuku came in, slashing down on the Nomu's neck, his water breathing flowing throughout, as the slash would go, cutting cleanly right through the Nomu. So the Nomu's head would pop clean off. Izuku had managed to decapitate the random monster. However, just immediately the Nomu's head would instantly flow right back to its body, reconnecting. As Izuku would stare on in shock at what was going on before his eyes, he would only shake his head with his in hand as his grip lessened. His grip lessening on the sword, dropping it to the floor. He would drop to his knees, holding his head as the Nomu would come rushing towards him. Before quickly, Izuku would swoop up his sword, grabbing it before plunging it into the Nomu's neck. Izuku happened to land on part of the concrete ruins of the fountain. High enough, Izuku plunged the katana's blade right into the Nomu's head. As the Nomu would give off a screech of agony, jumping backwards, holding its brain, as the squishing sound of its brain running around and being heard. Izuku would do this, would pull out his blade before falling back, staring at the Nomu who was screaming in pain. So all of a sudden, All Might would break through the doors, finally here. So you would end up seeing this Nomu going on. He would jump into action, punching the Nomu right in the face, not helping any of the Nomu's troubles. So the Nomu would continue screeching in pain and agony. Izuku would fall backwards once again, just staring up at the sky, breathing heavily. He couldn't believe what he had just done. He had basically just saved himself off of luck. He was thankful, but yet it was just so unreal. As Izuku could be laying there, All Might would defeat the Nomu as the rest of the class who had been scattered throughout the USJ had been picked up by the other heroes of UA that would end up arriving. Once there, they would then end up transporting them back to UA, where we now end up seeing Izuku walk into class the next day. Alright, I know yesterday was quite the eventful day, but let's get over that by having a little sports festival for everyone. Of course, you all know what this is, the UA Sports Festival. Now, this is just the first sports festival of the year, as we haven't had any hero courses yet, so this is really just an in-house festival. It's not going to be like the major one we end up having at the end of the year. So, why don't we go ahead and begin? Which, it's really just going to be a 1v1 tournament against us in Class 1B. It's really just the last event of the sports festival. As Izuku would hear this, he would end up walking over where we now end up seeing Aizawa standing outside the classroom with everyone else dressed up in their PE uniforms. Alright, let's have the first matchup. Izuku and Uraraka. Let's have you two go up. As Izuku would walk up, he would grip onto his blade as the match would begin. As Uraraka would rush towards Izuku would block it with the tip of his sword before pushing her backwards, kicking her, causing her to lose her balance. As Izuku would lift his sword into the air, saying water breathing, second form, water wheel, spinning rapidly would cut right through her. Well, not exactly, only cutting her thin enough so it wouldn't kill her, but it would still hurt. As Izuku would end up doing that, it would end up jumping backwards, as Aizawa would look at him to see Uraraka is now on the ground. Aizawa would rush over towards Uraraka and ask if she could continue. Uraraka would shake her head, holding her just stomach in pain, but Izuku had slashed her in that area. After Izuku would up, walking back to watch Shinobu's fight, which happened to be against Tenya Ida. As Izuku would be watching, Shinobu would be holding her sword as the match would begin. Ida would rush at her quickly, however, before he could do anything, she would dodge out of the way before poking him with the tip of her sword. After this, she would continually dodge each of Ida's attacks, as finally after 5 minutes, Ida would start to feel the burn of Shinobu's poison. As the burning continued, Ida would finally fall to his knees, unable to continue with just such the pain of just the poison that Shinobu had done. After this, Izuku would end up acing Mina, as Izuku would crack his fingers as the match would begin. She would slide towards Izuku using her acid, however Izuku would dodge, elbowing her right in the side. Before using his blade, he would end up hitting her with the butt end of it right in the side of the head. She would fall to the ground. Izuku would get over her, putting her head right to the floor. Before looking over to Aizawa, he would call the match, saying that Mina couldn't go on as she was pinned. As Izuku, now in the semi-finals, you would see he was going up someone named Kirishima. After this, Izuku would walk up to just the arena as the match would begin. Kirishima would rush towards Izuku, however Izuku would immediately just dodge this attack. Dodging it, Izuku would slash with his sword, however Kirishima would harden using his quirk as the sword would hit Kirishima's hardened skin, for Izuku would prevail, continuing to push down, applying pressure onto Kirishima's skin, which hadn't been trained to the point that we see the anime Kirishima in just, it hadn't yet been trained to its fullest extent. As Izuku would push down, the hardening would shatter, falling off like rocks. As Kirishima would scream in pain, Izuku would then hit him with the butt end of his sword right in the cheek. As he would fall to the ground, Izuku would be standing over top of him, his sword over his head, about to do something. However, Aizawa would stop the match once again. After that, Izuku would be told he was going to the finals, as the semi-finals of the other match would end up beginning, Shinobu versus Shoto Todoroki. As Izuku would be staring on at the match, Shinobu would be wielding her sword as Todoroki would be staring at her. As the match would begin, Todoroki would glide along his ice, kind of mimicking the movements of Mina, rushing towards Shinobu. However, at the last second, you create an ice wall as Shinobu would plunge her sword right into it. As this would be happening, it would shatter after Shinobu would plunge her sword into it, causing her stroke to be slowed. As Todoroki would slide under her sword, grabbing the bottom of her foot, lifting her up before spraying her with a barrage of fire. As her face now charged, she would jump backwards, looking on, rubbing off some of her eyes. After that, Todoroki would appear right in front of her, slamming a fire fist and an ice fist right to the side of each of her, to both sides of her head. Shinobu would walk backwards, not prepared for how Todoroki just went out guns blazing like this, as she would be staring around looking for something that was going to happen, where nothing came. Finally, Todoroki would finally prevail right behind her, punching her in the back, causing her to fall over. Todoroki would then close her in ice as she couldn't move, giving Todoroki the victory, causing him to go on to the finals. As Izuku seeing this, Izuku would know that Todoroki was going to be quite the tough opponent. He couldn't let Todoroki win after just causing Shinobu to lose so easily. So after that, Izuku would walk into the arena, staring on towards Todoroki. As Izuku would be staring on towards him, the match would begin as Todoroki would rush towards him, using his ice to glide along, kind of like he was wearing ice skates, but really wasn't. As Todoroki would be coming towards Izuku would dodge Todoroki's iceberg attack before slashing through such ease precision, cutting cleanly right through it, almost hitting Todoroki even. Right as Todoroki was about to do anything else, Izuku would end up jumping towards him before gripping his sword again. Third form, flowing dance, Izuku would holding his sword, would jump at Todoroki, winding his body, lashing multiple times in a flowing like pattern, slicing through Todoroki. Todoroki would end up feeling this. The slice would be going right through his gut. However, Aizawa had told Izuku that he could only use shallow cuts. So with that, Izuku really couldn't do much harm to Todoroki. It was really long term with bleeding out. So really just with the pain of that, it was mostly just going to halt a lot of Todoroki's fast movements. However, before anything else could happen, Izuku would end up jumping towards him again. Fourth form, striking tide, Izuku would say, twisting around, jumping with his body, slashing his sword multiple times all around Todoroki. As Todoroki would continuously, all these little cuts would end up appearing to Todoroki's body. So Todoroki would end up looking around, wondering where Izuku had gone. Izuku had used the same strategy that Todoroki had near the end of his and Shinobu's fight. With Izuku now disappearing, Todoroki didn't know where he was. Before he would end up looking up, with Izuku's sword held high in the air, he would yell, second form, water wheel, spinning rapidly, cutting down to the top of Todoroki, cutting right across his forehead and the middle of his nose. So Todoroki would feel this, he would drop to the ground, looking around, as Izuku would then appear right in front of him, punching him before hitting him with the butt end of his sword. As Todoroki would fall to the ground, Izuku would hold his sword right up to Todoroki, as if saying, checkmate. However, Todoroki didn't like this at all, immediately sliding under Izuku right through his legs before going to and fire right out towards him. However, Izuku wasn't there. As Izuku would be right behind Todoroki, Izuku would grab Todoroki by the neck, holding up his katana as he would start to pierce the start of Todoroki's skin. As Todoroki would end up putting his hands up, falling to the ground, he would look angrily on towards Izuku. How could he have lost so easily? How could he have done such bad in such a fight? Todoroki would be thinking to himself, after all that training with father, how could I have lost so easily? I didn't even get to hit hard on him. Todoroki would say, clenching his fists in anger. He felt like he had just disappointed himself. As to be doing that, all of the students would end up walking back. As Izuku noticed there was none of Class 1B, Izuku would ask Aizawa about it, how there was an absence of Class 1B, which Aizawa would end up just shaking his head. Yeah, they actually failed a couple of tests, so they all had to redo that. Lucky for you all, you're not failing, or at least most of you. Some of you, who were the absent ones, happened to have to go retake those tests with Class 1, with 1B. So, yeah, can't really do much about it. I thought they'd be coming, but last minute cancellation. So, anyway, class, tomorrow's going to be your first hero training, so prepare. As it's going to be quite the workout, as I would say. Finally, after all that, the students would end up be walking into class the next day. Izuku would be walking in. He would sit down, as Aizawa would end up walking in with All Might right behind them. Good morning, class, both of them would say simultaneously. Today we're gonna begin your hero training. So, why don't we begin? All of you versus me. It's going to be quite the interesting fight, don't you think? All Might would say, cracking his fists before cracking his neck. What? Some kids would say, as All Might would only just laugh. Into the courtyard now. I can't wait to see how strong some of you are. I saw All Might would say, smiling on towards them. As they would then go put their PE uniforms on, All Might would be standing across from them in the dirt patch. As the match would begin, All Might would rush in with his fists flailing, flowing like the wind. as his punch would come hurtling down onto Class 1A. And that is where part 5 of What If Deku Had Water Breathing comes to an end. I hope you all did enjoy it, and if you did, please consider subscribing, as it really does help this channel out, and you can even be notified when the other parts of this series do end up coming out. I thank you all for watching, once again, and goodbye.